them that they're ready to eat. If they think of food or think of eating and they feel kind of nauseous, or they recognize that they are not salivating, then they don't want to eat at that time. They might try to switch to dining more lightly, have a smaller dinner plate. So it's funny how that tricks your mind. Having a smaller dinner plate tells your brain you're full with less food. Allow enough time between meals for full digestion. Kapha dosha slows digestion down. And so we need to allow more time. If the client was usually taking 3 meals per day, in springtime, they may be satisfied with 2. This is a time we really want to pay attention to snacking and avoid eating between meals. So if we pay attention to the appetite and we pay attention to how much energy we're spending, and we eat to satisfy that appetite, then we will naturally dine more lightly. If I am on autopilot, or if I'm eating with a lot of distractions, then I will tend to eat more. But I'm not spending the energy, so I end up increasing kapha even more. So I'm doing something with my screen for a sec. There we go. I wanted to make sure I had my chat open in case anybody needs my attention. So these are our food habits for kapha season. These are the food habits for all of us. Next week, we're going to dive into some herbs that are really good. And we consider, like with our clients, see if they're spicing their foods well enough. Kapha is cold, so this is a time we really dive into those hot spices and herbs. These typically, we've got some Italian, we've got some Indian. I have to get with somebody in Vietnam to add some Vietnam herbs into our list. So the commonality with these herbs, cayenne, ginger, cinnamon, garlic, if one takes garlic, because it's not considered a sattvic herb, clove and peppers, oregano, basil, thyme, marjoram, sage. These are all heating herbs because kapha dosha is cold. Kapha dosha has a low agni. So in the kapha season, we all struggle with that low agni. We all struggle with that coolness and heaviness. So we want our foods to be more highly spiced, more sharp during this season. When we increase the heating quality of the herbs, we increase spicing, we stimulate the agni, and we reduce the impact of kapha dosha. So your client is kapha or it's kapha season, we would want them to have spicier foods because we want to support the digestive agni and address that kapha dosha that is on the rise. So think about the dinacharya. We adapt the dinacharya, how we go through the day, based on the season of the year. So all of us would do well in the springtime to wake up 1 hour before sunrise. Now, in the springtime, the sun is coming up kind of at a moderate time. It's not the earliest time. It comes up at its earliest time, really in June. But so we start waking up earlier, getting a jump on the day, because the later we wake up, the heavier we feel when we wake up. You might want to try this for yourself. Set your alarm for 1 hour before sunrise and see how you feel waking up, or set it for an hour after and see which time do you jump out of bed and want to start doing something. What I would love for everyone to do during springtime, first thing, is some stretching. Like that full yogic breath, starting from your toes, bringing up all the way up into the sky, and stretching, because we're awakening the prana. We've been asleep, we're heavy, we're dull, and we want to wake up the body. So we have a tendency, not us, but there's that tendency to reach for the artificial prana, the coffee, the stimulant, the tea, or to jump into the shower. But even before we do that, we want to invite the prana in. So taking those deep breaths and stretching to bring that prana out to the extremities. Dry brush massaging can be beneficial here. Now, this can be done with a dry brush, where you're kind of going the same direction you would do with an abhyanga. You could also do it with gloves that could be either silk gloves or sisal gloves. You could do it with a washcloth that's dry. But what you're trying to do is to increase circulation, because that's going to warm up the tissues. It'll increase the flow through the lymph, and it's not going to have the addition of oil. So oils are like kapha dosha, heavy, moist, dense. And so we want to slow down. We want to stop the oils, but increase friction so that we're able to get that energy moving. Exercise during this time would be more stimulating. Somebody's going to increase the heart rate. Maybe I want to walk a little faster, a little further in my walk. I want to do asana that are more challenging. I want to do things that will get my heart rate up, get my breath up, and increase my strength. Remember, kapha dosha falls into lethargy, and we're trying to wake up that kapha. Stimulating pranayama practice would be really important at this time. Breath practices like Kapalabhati or Bhastrika. Anything I can do to bring my respiration rate up is going to be really important. So we adapt the dinacharya based on the season. And we just, like I said, we're just trying to counter the kapha dosha that is all around us. Looking at asana for the season, strength building and heating practices. So I mentioned we would do that more strenuous exercise. You could do this in a warmer room. You could do, say, sun salutations with increased movement. So we're bringing it, increasing the breath and the heart rate. We want those muscles to stay toned and limber, because in springtime, we have a tendency to not, and to just be heavy and dull. We have that energy of kapha dosha. Kapha is strong. Kapha is focused. Kapha has a lot of tissue. And what we're trying to do is to direct the energy of kapha dosha, so we increase the strength that we have in the tissues of the body. Kapha dosha builds tissue. So I'm going to go here. Kapha dosha builds tissue, but we need that tissue to have good quality strength and tone. So during this season, we're all going to be more adept at building quality tissue. Kapha increases the quantity of tissue. And if we are increasing the quantity of tissue without directing it to go in the direction we want, then we end up producing more tissue that is high quantity of tissue, but low quality of tissue. So to offset that, we make sure that the asana is much more stimulating. The full yogic session that is done with Shivananda Yoga is more kapha reducing, warming up with that number of sun salutations, and then going into really strength building postures. Very good for the springtime for everyone. The other thing we'd look at, now we've gone beyond the proper exercise into other therapeutics. Well, we're always concerned with the state of the Agni. So we think about Kapha dosha has a low Agni. So what can we do to bring that Agni up? Well, we make the diet lighter. We talked about dropping from 3 meals a day to 2 meals a day, eating in accordance with their appetite. And we talked also about spicing. So these two go together. Reduce the quantity of food and increase the heat of the spicing, and we sharpen that low Agni. So incorporating more heating culinary spices is very important. And you could use these in teas as well. A ginger tea is really good for Kapha dosha. Cinnamon tea, any kind of spicy tea, something that's got a little bite to it. From an Ayurvedic perspective, like we're always concerned with cleansing, right? Making sure that we're removing ama from the tissues, ama from the GI tract. So springtime is the best time of year for cleansing. So everyone takes that light and spicy diet, because the lighter we take it, like I say, light food, spicing, because we're trying to raise that Agni away from Kapha dosha. So, of course, Kapha dosha would be operating with these things for a lot of the year. If someone has a more Vata Prakruti, meaning this is a Vata dosha person in the Kapha time of year, they still want to be doing the things that we recommended. They want to be waking earlier. They want to be eating according to their appetite. They want to do things to wake the body up, especially if they notice some of these Kapha dosha symptoms, kind of heavy and dullness sneaking in. What they could also do is, if the foods are too light or too dry, they might want to add a little bit of oil or ghee to the dishes. So again, we're coming into this with consciousness, with awareness of who am I and what do I need. Vata dosha tends to be dry and cold and light. So they don't want to take in things that are too dry. Kapha dosha, having a lot of that moisture, could take those drying foods. So in order to offset the dryness, the oils get added, but less oil than Vata would use in the wintertime. In the wintertime, Vata might use a tablespoon of oil at each meal. During the springtime, maybe a teaspoon. So they cut it down a lot. They want to make sure they're hydrating also to offset the drying quality of the foods. So you always want to see them with their insulated bottle that's going to have some warm water or a warm tea in it. Again, paying attention to the Agni. If their Agni is weak, if they have a cold digestive system, they want to have a sharp tea, maybe a cinnamon tea or a ginger tea. If they notice that, because Vata is variable, if they notice today is a day when the digestion seems sharper, they would take just water, or they might use a cooling tea. But they want to make sure that they are hydrating, because Vata could get too dry if they just do kapha reducing things, because kapha is wet, so everything we do increases dryness. They're spicing. They don't want to be as sharp as someone of kapha dosha. They still want to have more warming spicing happening during the springtime, but they don't want it to be so sharp that they're creating dryness. They would continue with daily abhyanga. What I love to have Vata people do in the springtime is to start with a dry brush and then do their abhyanga after. So they wake up the body, they increase the prana in the skin, and then they nourish it. They probably would like to use less oil in the springtime. And so in the wintertime, if they find themselves using 2 ounces of oil with their abhyanga, now they would be using just about 1. They might want to switch to a warmer abhyanga oil. They would exercise to their own strength and ability. So say they were doing that yoga, the Shivananda yoga program, maybe they're going to do more slowly. They're going to do it with more focus. Maybe they do 3 to 6 rounds of sun salutation, slowly with focus, aligned with the breath. And if they cleanse very lightly. And we have a wonderful question here. It says, how about in a place that has no winter? Tropical regions like Ho Chi Minh City, does it still apply? Usually what we do in more tropical places is you look at what are the qualities of the seasons that you have, because you still have seasons, whether it's a wet season or a dry season. The dry season becomes the Vata time, the wet season becomes the more Kapha time. We would try to identify the flow of the doshas through the year for the individual regions. If you're unsure, you can do day to day. So when I was in Vietnam a few years ago, it was pouring rain every day. So it's really much more of a Kapha season. And this was in, I think of the months, I think it was in April, like it was March or April. And it was just rainy, rainy, rainy. So I was doing a lot while I was there to offset the moisture. I was doing more Vata pacifying things. Oh, I should say more Kapha pacifying things. I'm sorry. And I wasn't using a lot of oils at that time because I wasn't challenged with dryness. So that's the kind of thing we wouldn't look to. We look to the season to help identify it. And this is, again, it could be a place that I could speak to specifically people in Vietnam to see how your seasons fall out. Because this is kind of the Ayurvedic, just putting them into place and saying the thing. Okay, and then for people who have a Pitta dosha prakriti, they want to make sure they're eating seasonal foods, but they don't want to take as many pungent vegetables. Those pungent vegetables, things like spicy peppers and things like that, are fine for Kapha, and they're even fine for Vata. But Pitta has to be careful with them because they already have too much heat. Seasonally, in the springtime, you think about when do the bitters come in? So typically that's going to be one of the first foods that comes up in the springtime are bitters, and bitters offset Kapha. So that's wonderful. We can get them at those times. The Pitta has to really watch the spicing. So they don't want those spicy foods. If you're cooking for a family, you'd want it to be moderate spice and let the Kapha dosha add more spice at the table. Let the Pitta dosha add more greens at the table. So the greens cool it down, more spice heats it up, and Vata would be right there with the moderate spicing. The other things that Pittas can do is overheating, either through their diet, the foods they take in or what they're drinking, or their activity. If Pitta has been kind of dormant during the winter, when the sun starts to show up for longer during the day, they really want to get active. And so they want to make sure they're not being so active that they're raising Pitta internally. The best foods for them are bitters and astringent tastes in foods and herbs. The bitters we can get through greens, through vegetables, especially the peels of vegetables, and astringency we get a lot through legumes and dals. So soy, tofu, as well as all the variety of beans would be a way to increase astringency during the spring season. Okay, so before we jump into summer, let me see, does anybody have any spring season questions? Right now, in the US, this would have just passed. Well, it passed in June. One thing I want to mention is that while spring is going on and we are in kapha season, for those people who have more pitta prakruti, who have more pitta in your constitution, pitta is coming up. The days are getting longer, the sun is getting hotter, and now pitta is coming up. So people of pitta prakruti have to be really careful in the springtime that they are not creating too much heat to bring all that extra heat into the summer. Purna, yes, spring season is happening soon in Sydney. We're going to go into fall in the US. And so in Australia, they'll be going into springtime. So this is a very pertinent topic for you, talking about spring and kapha dosha. Okay, so then the season shifts and we go to summertime. As the year continues, now we are in the time of pitta dosha. All of us are in the time of pitta dosha. Purna is in Australia, so she is coming out of, she's been in wintertime. And so she's got the opposite, being in the lower part of or being in the southern hemisphere. Pitta dosha always shows up between kapha and vata. It's the middle time of the cycles. It's the time when the plants come to maturity. It's the time when the trees that were blossoms in the springtime now are holding fruit. The vegetables that were seeds in the springtime are now producing new seeds of their own. So it's the time when the maturity happens and that actual fruition. For us, it's a time period where we be more productive for hours in the day because the sun is out for more hours. And so a lot of work gets done at this time. We tend also to be more social. We tend also to be a little bit angrier and shorter tempered because when it's warm, we have that pitta coming up. And if we don't do something to bring the pitta down, we will be seeing it. What happens in the summertime is it says results reveal the quality of the foundation. What does that mean? Well, if I took care of my pitta dosha, my constitutional pitta dosha during the springtime by following pitta adapted, kapha programs pitta adapted for the spring, then I'm going to bring less heat into the summer. I'm going to show up with less heat in the body, less heat in the mind. If I didn't take care of my pitta during the springtime, then I'm going to feel hot and irritable and angrier. For all of us that aren't pitta dosha, if we pacified kapha in the springtime, we are ready for pitta in the summertime. I used to live in an area that got very hot in the summer. I kind of still do, but it's not as hot. I was in Central California in the San Joaquin Valley. And it would be typical to have a week where every day was over 100 degrees or over 40, I guess 38 Fahrenheit, centigrade. And people would ask how you made it through the summer. And I would answer that if you lived through the spring, if you took care of yourself in the springtime, summer was easier because it gradually got hot. Sorry, I jumped. You guys, I heard something. It gradually got hotter. So when we pay attention to the season, we better adapt to the seasonal shift. If we ignore the season, we tend to be disturbed by the seasonal shift. Summertime is a time where we can really invest in and live our purpose. Let's look at the qualities of the season. All of us, regardless of our prakriti, are impacted by the increased qualities of pitta dosha during this season. We are all going to feel hotter, oilier, sharper. The movable quality of pitta, it shows up in a little bit less focus. It becomes harder to maintain that focus. The movable quality of pitta is often revealed in their ability to shift from one thing to the next more easily than kapha dosha can. We talked about childhood being a time of kapha. Kids want to hear the same stories. They want to do the same things. They want to eat the same foods. Not so much in the summertime. In the summertime, we're open to change. We are not actively seeking change. But all of a sudden, it's like, oh, yes, here's the fruit. Here's the vegetable that I really want because I've missed it. So it's not like we're as attached to our habits during this time of year. That's why we want to take vacations. The volatility of pitta can show up, but I think the volatility is often really related to that heat. So there's more violence that occurs in the world when it's hot because we have more pitta, we have less patience. So there's more frustration that's going to show up at this time. So some common conditions that we see during summertime, fevers are more prevalent. These are fevers without a viral or bacterial origin. We get overheated. More infections. There can be more viruses. There are summertime colds. There are viral infections or bacterial infections that become more common in the summer. Rashes with the skin involvement and redness that we see with pitta dosha. Inflammation is more common. And they're going to have more internal inflammation. So you might see more instances of things like cold sores, sciatic nerve pain, or pain in the joints can be more prevalent when we are overheated. Emotionally, we tend towards greater intensity, irritability, frustration, and anger. So we seek out those cool places to be, right? Because we feel calmer, more balanced in these cooler places. The diet that we're going to take during this time of year, we want to take more of those seasonally available foods. We're awake more hours during the day. And so we want to make sure that we have the nutrition that we need to serve as we go through our work. Fortunately, there is so much good food. Everyone I've ever met who is a raw foodist has been pitta dosha. And it's hard to convince them that what they thrive on during the summertime is not necessarily going to be the best food for later in the year. But summertime is a time when more of us can digest these raw foods. So foods like salads are going to be more nutritious for us during the summertime. Usually those salads have a lot of greens in them, and greens are bitter. And that bitter quality is really pacifying to pitta dosha. We can now take some of the heavier grains. Remember, in springtime, we had more millet and quinoa, the lighter grains. Now the rice, the wheat, the barley can come back in. We don't have to focus so much on proteins, although we can get good quality proteins. We show some, in the picture, we show some good dals here, which can be very good for protein sources during the summertime. We really want to make sure we're taking lots of vegetables. So we're looking at that plate now again. The plate now is divided in quarters. We've got some proteins, plant proteins, and then we can do carbs, we can do some grains, and a full half is filled up with fruits and vegetables. And if you recall from our food section, Ayurveda advises that fruit is taken away from meals. So my dinner plate is all vegetables on half, vegetables and greens. And then a quarter of it is the protein and a quarter for a complex carb. Usually people ask, like, pittas need more stability in the diet. So they need to have those grains and those proteins during the summertime because they need to last longer. We're going to have more proteins come in these plant proteins to stabilize vata. Proteins are useful for regeneration. If the person is feeling more hunger, if they're really physically active, then higher proteins are going to be in there. The least amount of protein we eat during the year or need during the year is during springtime. Because in springtime, we're kind of living off what we've stored during the winter. During the pitta season, we just want to make sure that we've got a lot of the plate is filled up with fruits and vegetables. We have a tendency, and this is probably a US tendency more so than I saw in Vietnam, but to overdo the proteins. There's so much of the plate is taken up with protein. And then there's kind of a suggestion of a vegetable, a little carrot, a little bit of broccoli. And what we want to do is make sure that we're getting enough of the greens and in there to pacify the pitta. The plant proteins tend to be cool, and so that's good for pitta. Animal proteins tend to be heating, and so not good for pitta. We want to avoid foods that are fried, overly heating, oily, or overly spiced. So we look at the overall diet, like I said, with that dinner plate, a quarter of it being the protein. That would be like a half cup to a cup of legumes, tofu. Then a half cup of the carb, like rice, and then a full half of the plate made up of the vegetables and greens. Well, I want to mention something with this summertime. Let's see, I'm watching my time for our break. We're going to be coming up on our break in a minute. That even though we have the summer, you may notice the heat in the summer. You may notice that your appetite drops and your digestion is not as strong. So rather than the fire outside driving up a fire inside, it's like the fire outside is taking the place of the fire inside. So when we take in enough fruits and vegetables to pacify pitta, we'll be able to fully get the value from those proteins. If we take too much protein, it's like putting a big log on that low fire. One thing I want to say different, and this might come up in the next section, in the next page, but now we're going to go to probably those 3 meals a day. So you'll be getting much less protein, or much more protein than you were in the springtime when you were focused on just 2 meals a day. So we do want to have something in the morning before we start the work of the day, something at midday while we're doing the work of the day, and something in the evening to kind of make sure we got enough to satisfy any food hunger that's happening at that time. Okay, we're going to take a short break, again, to give the translators a break and all of you. We're going to rejoin about 5 minutes after the hour and pick up here with our next food habits slide. So we're going to come back at 5 minutes after the hour. I can't see what I'm typing. Okay, thank you. Quarts to 2 liters of water in making my hibiscus tea. And then I'll drink that during the summertime to keep the body cool. You can also make bitter teas. I like the kind of I don't know what I'd call it, more of an astringency with hibiscus. Herbs like dandelion root, burdock root, gotukola leaf, or skullcap. These are all bitter herbs that help reduce heat in the liver. So it's interesting to note with Pitta dosha and Pitta season, if we can keep the liver cool, we will keep the blood cool, we will keep the body cool. So if you or your client overheats, you're better off reaching for something bitter to drink in order to reduce that heat. I remember when I was in Vietnam, there was a drink I would often get that had, it was a jar that had some aloe vera, some coconut water, and in a bottle. I don't know what they called it, but it was really good. And I always looked for it in the shops. So hibiscus is more of your astringent cooling herb that you could make into a tea. And that's the picture here is hibiscus. And then green juices. Green juices are often bitter, and they have that impact of clearing heat out of the liver and reducing heat in the blood. So if we have someone who is more Vata Prakruti, how are they going to go through this? Because they do still want to be pacifying Pitta during Pitta season, but they have to be conscious of Vata dosha. The Vata does better on a cooked foods diet than raw. They could do salads during summertime, but they want to make sure that they're not combining cooked foods with raw foods. So it's like one meal in the day would be a raw salad, and the next meal would have cooked food. They need to add a little bit of spice if the food has a cold quality. A lot of vegetables and greens that are available during the summertime are cooling in nature. Think of something like bitter melon, very cooling. So Vata would want to have that spiced a little bit. And moderate spicing, it's the same spicing you're using for Kapha dosha, just not as much of it. They want to use light oils to offset the kind of drying quality of the foods. They want to keep doing their daily abhyanga. They may, if they switched to warming oils in the springtime, they want to go back to an oil that is not as heating in the summer. So what I like to do in the summertime is an oil that's got some sesame oil and coconut oil. The coconut oil is cooler, so I blend it. Some people like sunflower oil also. Question from Ompriya. Why don't we combine cooked with raw foods? They digest at different rates. And so when we combine a cooked food with a raw food, it's most often that the raw food is going to, for lack of a better word, ferment, but it gets digested more quickly, but it can't pass through the system more quickly. It's stuck waiting for the cooked food to process. So that's one of the Ayurvedic food combining rules, is like avoiding that. And I also want to mention, and I would have mentioned this if we talked a lot about combining foods, that you really only have to consider what's the impact of food combining when you begin to notice that the combined food is not digesting well, or that you have a weak Agni. So a person who's got a stable Agni could put some cooked things into their salads and digest everything fine. But if you begin to notice that they're eating a salad that's got cooked and raw foods, and they're experiencing any kind of digestive disturbance, then you would pull those apart. So continuing the daily abhyanga, but they might cool down their oil a little bit or use cooling essential oils in the oil that they're using. They want to exercise, but they want to make sure they're paying attention to their strength and their ability. And Vata doesn't do well with bitter juices and bitter herbs because they're too cold. So Vata likes the hibiscus because the making it into a tea offsets the astringency of the hibiscus. With the bitter herbs, it just can be too bitter, creating a challenge for Vata dosha being too cold. With the Kapha Prakruti, they also want to favor cooked foods over raw because Kapha still, the person of Kapha nature, is still bringing a lower Agni into this season. So they want to cook them, but now they might do like lightly steamed. So it's cooked, but it's not mushy. Moderate spicing to offset the cooling quality of the food, but now we can bring in a little bit more spice, make sure they're able to digest it. They want to maintain their high activity level. So this means that they're doing the stretching and they're doing exercise between 6 and 10 a.m. and again throughout the day. Favor those bitters and astringents, and the bitters, of course, are from beans. The astringents are going to come from legumes and tofu and soy. If they feel like they're getting too lethargic, they're getting too sluggish, they want to ramp up the spices. So if Vata feels they're getting too lethargic and too sluggish, they want to cool themselves down. So it's interesting. When Vata gets too hot, they just kind of wilt. And so what they want to do is to cool down a bit. And that can be done by making sure they're hydrating well enough. When Kapha gets too hot, they get more lethargic, but they have to keep moving. They have to make sure that they are, this outside heat is getting trapped in the body, and they want to make sure that they are moving it out. They're getting enough prana. And then the season shifts. We move into Vata season, fall and early winter. Vata dosha is always the acharya at the end of cycles, as we begin to take that energy back into the body or into the core. There's external decay. In the case of nature, the plants have produced, I see it with my tomato plants. The plants have produced the tomatoes, and now it begins to die. The flowers have produced their flowers, now they begin to die. The trees have produced the fruit, they're turning color. They take the energy from the exterior and bring it down into the roots for the next season. So the decay happens externally, but there's energy being gathered internally. This is a time for all of us of reflection, realization, and actualization. These are factors that are going to come up in the course of our lifetimes. We enter the Vata time of life and we reflect on what is it I've done? What is it I want to do? What have I achieved? It's a time period of achieving completion. So, as in the other seasons, it doesn't matter what dosha we are, we will all feel colder, lighter, drier, and more unstable during this time of year. Those increased qualities of Vata dosha are going to make the Vata nature person even more Vata, but it will impact the Pitta dosha and Kapha dosha person. So they want to pay attention to making different choices during this time of year. Some common conditions that come up here: colds, flus, bronchitis, that's an inflammatory condition, pneumonia. It's funny. I look at this list: colds, flus, bronchitis, pneumonia. From an Ayurvedic perspective, if you have a cold, you have to rest to recover from the cold, or you'll be more susceptible to flus. If you have a flu, you have to rest, or you become more susceptible to the flu landing in the lungs, the respiratory imbalance landing in the lungs, and it's settling there, and you having bronchitis or pneumonia. So the key thing here is if we have a cold or we have a flu, this is a sign from the body that it's struggling. And so we want to take care of it at that point so that it can't move deeper into the body, into those schrotuses or those tissues that are held more deeply. Another common thing that I noticed because I worked in childcare. So I used to work in a large childcare center where I would have between 50 and 100 children on site during the day. And round about the beginning of December, when it began, when winter was just kicking up, I would see more and more chapped lips as the dryness of the season settled into their bodies. I would also hear a lot more about constipation. And these are very common Vata dosha symptoms. The dryness in the mucous membranes, dryness in the digestive tract showing up as constipation. And it was interesting to me because I was just learning Ayurveda at that time, and to see it so prevalent that the Vata came on really strong in the wintertime. We also see more mental and emotional challenges, self-doubt, fear, anxiety, and nervousness. So that can happen for everybody. So what can we do? Well, we want to eat seasonally available foods, but there are fewer seasonally available foods. The summertime had a lot of production of fresh fruits and vegetables. We get into fall, we have some fall fruits like our root squash, our winter squash, our root vegetables. A lot of times, what's seasonally available are foods that store well. So things like root vegetables, the winter squash, apples, these are foods that store well, that they will last into the season. We now want food that is more nutritionally dense because we don't have access to all those fresh fruits of summer. So the heavier grains such as rice and wheat and oats. Kapha dosha would take a smaller portion size. Vata dosha would take a larger portion size. Those heavier vegetables I mentioned, root vegetables, winter squash. Now is the time when we take more proteins and less greens. On the one hand, the greens just aren't as available unless we have a place like we're living in Vietnam where the greens are available all year round. Oftentimes, if it's a harsh season, there's not a lot of greens that are available. We want to avoid foods that are dry, cold, light, or undercooked, or those that don't have a lot of nutritional value. At this time of year, see, again, Ayurveda is old, so they didn't have access to shipping food across lines. If I look at my picture here, strawberries, no, you don't eat them during the winter. They're too high in sugars, and it's just, you don't need that. The nuts, the bread, the grains, some of the root vegetables, the winter squash, these are all going to be preferable food choices. Interesting, I noticed this word in the center of the picture says fiber. Now, all these foods are high in fiber. And what does fiber do for us? It helps to make sure the stool is well without hydration. Stool doesn't move. It gets too bulky and stuck. So this is a good picture for what Vata needs is more fiber. It's just that I want to make sure the foods I'm taking are what I can access seasonally. Now, we still look at the food habits. We still want to pay close attention to the appetite. But remember what Vata's problem is they are separate. The body and mind are often in two different places. The body is here in this room, and the mind is figuring out what I'm going to do with the rest of the day. So what Vata has to make sure of is that they don't forget to eat. They take the time to eat during the day. It's like when I take my car on a drive, I've got to put gas in before I go. I can't wait. I'm going to pull from my resources, my reserves. Your body is built so that you can pull from your reserves. But if you're Vata dosha, you just don't have those reserves. So where do you pull that energy from? You pull that energy from ojas. So it weakens your ojas. It weakens your internal strength, stamina, and immunity. So they want to pay close attention to their appetite, but don't forget to eat. They want to avoid eating when they're doing something else. Stop what they're doing to focus on the meal. Pitta dosha has to stop working and eat. Vata dosha has to stop whatever it is they're doing, because they may be doing something really fun. They're just distracting themselves. Maybe they're just scrolling on their phone, but they want to stop that activity and be present with the meal so that they can fully digest it. And then dine without distractions. All of those good food habits that we talked about a few weeks ago are most important for Vata dosha. So Vata has to really be aware of how they are eating. Spicing is similar to Kapha dosha, but now we get some of the sweeter spices like cinnamon, cardamom, fresh ginger, fennel, cumin, turmeric. They can still do some of the pungents that were good for Kapha dosha, like peppers or Italian herbs, but they really want to focus. And all of us, again, I'm saying like just Vatas, but it's all of us during this season need to be pacifying Vata. These herbs help to stabilize Agni and reduce that impact of Vata dosha. So we see in this picture, we've got turmeric root, we've got a little bit of mint and some lemon. And this is going to offset, this is going to be really good for a cold. If you're coming down with a cold, I love if I feel the first signs of a cold in winter, I'm going to do a turmeric, ginger, and honey tea. And usually I can turn it around because the cold is coming not because of a virus, but because my Vata opened the door to the virus. So when I suppress the Vata, the door gets closed. It doesn't always get me around a cold, but it's often enough that I use that as my go-to. Now, adapting the dinacharya, they're getting up a little bit later. Now they're waking up at sunrise, and sunrise is getting later and later and later. So devoting time to their practice, to their self-care practice, especially a practice like Abhyanga. Abhyanga is one of the best practices for Vata dosha. But even beyond any individual practice, the most important thing for pacifying Vata dosha is consistency. So whatever their daily routine is, having it be a daily routine. Vata dosha is more likely to abandon routines, to eschew routines. They don't want to do them. But when they start to be routine with their routines, really stable, then these routines help to stabilize the Vata. They want to make sure they're staying warm enough during the day. So having lots of layers if they live in a cold place, making sure they can hold their heat in. And again, this is for everybody. Stability and routines will help minimize the impact of Vata dosha during the winter. All of us in the wintertime will need time in the afternoon for rejuvenation and self-care. So whatever dinacharya we're doing, Pitta needs to bring that conscious awareness, that mindfulness here, and pay more attention to routines. Kapha dosha wants to make their exercise very routine. So the more stable the flow through the day, the more Vata is pacified, the less impact that Vata season will have. Looking at asana practice. During Vata season, we want to make sure that the asana practice is pacifying to Vata dosha. This means it's going to be more balanced, focused, slow, greater breath awareness, attention to alignment. In the springtime, we can all move through asana more quickly. During the summertime, we want to do it in a more cool fashion. Here we want it to be warming and focused. Best if there is both a morning and evening practice, as we often do with Shivananda Yoga. Restorative asana, this is a time of year when we want to draw the energy in. And so restorative practices are ones that are going to bring that prana back to the core, back to the subtle body, and strengthen it. In the springtime, we want to change that direction and bring the prana out from the center. But during the winter time, we're bringing it inward. And asana, of course, always perform to the strength of the individual. And this is based on their prakriti. Kapha dosha is stronger and can do more intense and active asana. Pitta dosha is moderately strong, and Kapha dosha is the least strong of the three. Regulate the Agni, warm culinary spices. So a cinnamon ginger tea. I like a ginger fennel tea. All of these are wonderful. They've got a lot of flowers here. Those can be really nice for Vata, but I don't think you'll find them seasonally. But you can do things that are pacifying to the nervous system, like chamomile tea. So you've got lots of options. And remember, an important thing with the winter time is hydration. Because typically, if you live in a place that's cold and wet, hydration won't be as harsh as necessary as it is when the weather is cold and dry. For all of us, we tend to have greater tendency towards anxiety and nervousness in the winter. So keeping the mind calm and the nervous system really strong would be a great practice. Mention some calming teas, chamomile, lemon balm, passion flower, which will put you to sleep, rose, teas like chai with nutmeg and milk. These are all going to calm the Vata. If the person's more Kapha, they may not need that calming to Vata. If the person is more Vata, they're going to really like having those herbs cooked into milk. And so this is called a milk decoction, but usually it's done half milk, half water. The milk could be an alternative milk, like a soy milk or a nut milk of other kind. And then you warm it with the herbs in it. And then if you like, you can add a little bit of ghee to that as well. So this is like one that's going to really, again, nourish, deeply nourishing. So if we think of the seasons in the spring, we want to activate. We're looking for everything that will activate the body and the mind. In the summer, we want to maintain. We want to maintain the coolness of the body and the coolness of the mind. And in the winter, the key word would be nourish, kind of go within, bring that energy inward. If the person is more Pitta, they want to watch out that they're not spicing too much and foods aren't too heavy. So spice minimally to offset the warming quality of the foods. The foods are all cooked. There's a lot of warm foodstuffs that someone would use during this time of year. And so Pitta wants to make sure that they're not overheating, they're not overdoing the Agni. Pitta does not need as many oils as Vata does, so lightly oiling their foods, and that would be preferably with uncooked oils. So putting an oil on at the table, using oil as a condiment. And typically the amount would be about a half teaspoon put onto their rice or onto their grain or onto their vegetable. They still want to keep doing their morning routines with attention, present moment focus. It's really like the Pitta person wants to avoid creating a Vata dosha imbalance. This is a great source of agitation for Pitta when Vata goes out of balance, because Pitta likes to be focused and direct, and Vata is all over the place. So when they really pay attention to offsetting Vata dosha during the winter time, they will keep their Pitta will not be as disturbed either. Now, if someone has a Kapha Prakruti, these foods that are available to us during the winter time are very heavy. So they want to make sure they're taking just small portions. Because they're heavy, they might want to spice them up a little bit more using the kapha pacifying spices and maintaining higher activity level. They don't need to be going within as much. They need to make sure that they're keeping that Agni strong. And the best taste for them are the pungents, bitters, and astringents. So they might have to seek those out a little bit more, because our tendency during the winter is to use more sweet foods, more grains, more root vegetables, more pumpkins and winter squash. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the slideshow. And oh, good, we've got about 20 minutes for questions. So I'm going to stop that. Stop share. There we go. And now we're back here. So the key takeaway from all of this is that we want to pay attention to seasonal shifts. I may have told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. I used to do a cooking class that was every month. I got a group of 8 people together and we cooked dinner together while they got a little lesson on Ayurveda. And I started it in November, which was Vata season. So I had all my Vata spices. And each month we met, and I still used all those Vata spices through November and December and January. And then it was Kapha season. I was still using the same spices, just probably a little bit more of them. February, March, April, May. And then June came, and I opened the cupboard and I realized none of these spices were appropriate for the coming season. I had to get a ladder and I had to move all those spices off to the side. And I had to reach in back for the fennel, the cumin, the coriander. And it really was for me just that aha moment of, oh, we have to pay attention to that change in the season. My favorite spices are the Vata spices. Given a choice, I would drink cinnamon tea all year round. But I have to remember that in the summertime, it's too hot. So we want to pay attention to those shifts and offset the gunas or the qualities that are present. Okay, we have some time for some questions. Let's see, I'm going to make that small. I'm still trying to play with my chat, which has taken over my whole screen. So does anyone have any questions on this topic, Ritucharya, or anything having to do with Ayurveda? And even beyond that, any questions you might have about your CHED experience? Let's see, now I got to find out where's my chat window. Oh, Priya, good question. So traveling around means we need to pay attention to the weather at that place, not just about the season. Yes. So again, at the time of the writing of the Charaka Samhita, people traveled, but they only traveled as fast as their body could carry them. So they didn't have to change what they were doing as much as we might have to. Say, for example, I decide to go visit Om Priya in Australia. So here it's summertime, and in Australia it's wintertime. That's going to be difficult on my body. So I want to pay attention to that. The shift is going to need vata pacifying. So I have to really make sure during my travels, I make sure I'm pacifying vata. So from the US to Australia is a long plane flight. Traveling on planes is very dehydrating. So I try to drink a cup of water each hour of flight. So I hope I can bring it on, but you can ask the stewardesses or old school flight attendants to help that. I carry ghee with me, so I can put ghee in my nostrils to keep my skin and body really moist. And I try to adapt schedules. Now, when I get to Australia, it's wintertime, and I have to shift completely from what I was doing to pacify pitta at home to pacifying vata in Australia. And then I have to do the same thing when I come back. It's hard. I think the biggest part of long distance travel that is important to adapt to is that the shift that we go through is unsettling to the three bodies. And so we do what we can to pacify vata around travel, always. The more I travel, the more I need vata pacification. There we go. So question, is it possible to have doshic imbalance of both kapha and pitta? I'm doing an intake of a client expressing pitta emotions, but expressing kapha body type. Yes, you are seeing it in your client that it is possible. What we see here in what the case that Bhaskara is describing is the person is struggling with kapha dosha physically and pitta dosha mentally. And here's where it gets a little tricky, but not too tricky. The key is when you're dealing with the physical body, you treat with diet. When you're working with the mind, you work with lifestyle. So I'd want to see the person following a kapha pacifying diet, which would be more greens, lighter foods, more spicing. Not too much because they don't want to disturb the pitta in their mind, but they want to make sure their agni stays strong and they can digest. For the mind, they want to be pacifying pitta. So they want to pay attention to bringing more mindfulness into their practices. They want to make sure they're not dealing with an overheated body. But we'd look at all those practices we would do to pacify pitta dosha, to see regularity around meal times, regular waking, sleeping times, and look at the flow through the day that they're maintaining, like stability in activity and rest, activity and rest, activity and rest. Pitta dosha oftentimes needs to focus more on the meditation and positive thinking, because what they do is they get into pitta mode and they just forget about letting go of the mind and its drive. But so the key thing there is if you see differences in the physical body and the mind, just remember the body gets treated with the diet and the mind gets treated with the lifestyle. These are really good questions. Okay, question. In winter, why and how to digest more protein in a cold season like that? Is Agni low in this season? It's really interesting that Agni is actually stronger in the wintertime. Not that I don't know if your appetite would much be stronger, but you can digest denser, more nutritious foods. But if we disregard portion control, like say I take a big serving of something that's nutrient dense, it could be too much and then it will put the Agni out. So it's just interesting that it's kind of counterintuitive that in the summertime the Agni is actually lower. So we take foods that are very easy to digest, those fruits, those vegetables, those greens. We take lighter grains. We take things that just break down pretty easy. We don't need a big fire for them. In the wintertime, we take foods that are more nutrient dense, and we need the bigger fire to break them down. And then we just have to watch that we're not overindulging. And I think as humans, we tend to take those nutritious foods and we make them more yummy, and we want to eat more and more of them. Like think of the foods that are available. You go someplace in the wintertime and there's all these delicious sweets. And so the body can digest it, but they want to use their consciousness to say, I probably don't need so much. The cold season with less action, so why less greens? Typically, again, because Ayurveda is old, and so they didn't have access to greens in the wintertime unless they were growing them in a greenhouse or somewhere they had the ability to grow those delicate greens. So because they are not as readily available. And the greens are typically more bitter. Bitter is very cold. Remember, the taste of bitter is made up of air and ether elements. And so it creates deep coldness in the body. And since the outside is cold, I don't want to force too much cold internally. Earlier, I mentioned therapeutics based on dosha prakruti. Could I please clarify how vikruti fits into this? Now, a vikruti is going to be an active imbalance, meaning that the person is presenting symptoms that would be moderate to severe intensity, that would have been going on for a longer time, or have shown up with a more severe intensity. A person who has an active vikruti would want to follow they would want to follow their dosha pacifying practices regardless of the season. So let's see, you've got an older person who has dementia. So it's an older person, vata time of life. Dementia is a vata kind of condition. We don't want to switch seasons and start pacifying kapha because their vata vikruti is still so great. So then that person would eat the vata warm, nourishing foods all year long until you could pacify the vata, which you may not pacify vata with dementia. The person who's kapha nature, and they have excess weight, they have maybe they have type 2 diabetes. So that's an active vikruti. They want to be pacifying kapha, pacifying kapha, pacifying kapha all year long. If the symptoms are mild, intermittent, then we'd want to live according to the season. So it's kind of a judgment call to determine if what you're seeing, it could be a vata dosha imbalance, but not so serious that they have to just pacify vata all year long. Menstruation. What about during menstruation in a different season? And what about before and after the cycle? Interestingly, menstruation is a cleansing process that women go through. So they'd want to treat that as a cleanse in classical Ayurveda. I was at a talk one time where someone asked about menstruation to the teacher, who was Maya Tiwari, who's written a number of books on Ayurveda. And I just remember her response. She was saying that the person was going through a cleanse, and you're not supposed to do additional cleansing during menstruation, because the menstruation itself is a cleanse. And so you're supposed to stop cleansing during the time period of menstruation and say, well, you shouldn't have to do that. And I just remember Maya Tiwari saying, in your menstruating, you're not even supposed to comb your hair. You're supposed to do nothing. And I thought, you know, and I guess at the time of the codifying of Ayurveda, they would still be going into the red tent and someone would be taking care of you. And we don't have that now. So we do still have to comb our hair and do things. So we could kind of say that all practices go to kind of stop and go to cleansing during the time period of menstruation. If possible, we don't go to work. We take nourishing foods. We support the body to cleanse. We don't want to overheat. It will increase the flow of blood. We also don't want to do nothing because that stagnates the flow of blood. So we just kind of have to pay attention to the body. So there's no seasonal shift in menstruation, just kind of an honoring of what the body's going through and conserving a little bit of the energy during the time. Okay, now this may be my last question, I think, because we'll be getting right up to our time. What should be done? What should be done when an imbalance has developed into a medical condition? Once it's a medical condition, now they have to work at that becomes the Vikruti that they're going to be working with. But maybe it's becomes something like high blood pressure or diabetes. Is there a way to apply today's insights so that these individuals can still lead happy lives? Yes. So, whenever I can put a Western name on something, such as high blood pressure or diabetes, it could be caused by Vata or Pitta or Kapha. So I still have to consider what gunas am I seeing in this person. Once something has gone deep enough into the body that I can give it a Western disease name, it is an active Vikruti. So let's say I have 3 people who have high blood pressure. One of them is more high blood pressure driven by Kapha. They're holding water in the body. Maybe they have some excess weight. They have some atherosclerotic plaque. These could be symptoms of Kapha. They want to be living, pacifying Kapha dosha all year long. So taking all that advice in the Kapha dosha section, they want to be doing that all year long. The Pitta nature person has hypertension, has high blood pressure, and they've got it more because of heat and inflammation in the blood vessels. They're intense. They're that type A personality. So going back to Bhaskara's question, we're going to come in with pacification of the mind, meditation, more time in nature, more letting go a little bit of their intensity. But they would want to be living with Pitta pacifying practices like we saw in the summertime all year long until that inflammation is handled. Vata type hypertension or high blood pressure is often driven by age and a hardening in the arteries, a dryness in the arteries. It's now Vata Vikruti, and it needs to be Vata pacifying all year long. So by pacifying the dosha that is driving the imbalance all year long, we minimize the negative effect of the imbalance. I have seen people reduce high blood pressure or diabetes by following doshically appropriate practices, but it's really out of the scope of CHET to do that. But you could have the conversation with someone about what would be right diet, right breathing, right exercise, right relaxation, and right positive thinking and meditation, so that they will lead those happy and healthy lives. Okay, now this will be the last one because I still have 2 minutes. Could I please advise on any memory techniques or frameworks that can help us retain the teachings better? For example, summary tables, infographics, or other ways of organizing key concepts. That's tricky because what I have found is the best way to learn and remember things is to talk about them. And this could be with your cohort or it could be if somebody around you wants to learn about Ayurveda or yoga theories or anything like that. And maybe I'm biased, like my dharma is more teaching. And so when I was in school, I had what I call a study buddy, just somebody I studied with, and we would make quizzes for each other. And she would ask me, okay, explain to me this. And then I would have to explain that. So I think using the material, not just reading it, but speaking it, using it through all the senses. I certainly think infographics are great. I'm a big chart person, as you probably see in the things that I do. I love charts. So when I did herbs, for example, I created this, crazy chart with all the hot herbs were in red and all the cold herbs were in blue and all their definitions were this way. So I love doing charts, but I think it's the process of making the chart that's the important thing. If you just gave me a chart and I looked at it, I would probably forget. But if I have to come up with how do I organize this information, that will better help me remember. And then, go back, revisit, talk to other people in your group, because it's huge. And I speak it all the time. Like I'm looking at 30 years of this. So I remember my first years though, when I would do talks at TTC, I would have notes in my hand. Oh yes, and Vata dosha. Okay, yeah, they're the cold, dry. Or when I would first start teaching, I would keep a sheet next to me that had information so I could make sure I was hitting all the points. And so be gentle with yourself as you're learning it, and just keep coming back to it. Make it your own. So good to see you all. Next week, we're going to talk about herbs. That'll be really fun. So we're going to chant and close class for today. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Vinyan, Vinyan, Vinyan. Om Namah Shivaya. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you all next week.